This is Retrohammer, Imperial Space Marine, LE2 from 1985. Every great meme has got an origin and a starting point, and the Space Marine has indeed become a meme and something of a alternate counterculture icon, we could almost say. From very humble beginnings, the Space Marine has become somewhat iconic and a true mass media phenomenon. Indeed, if you were to look on YouTube and search for the Dawn of War trailer part 3, you would find that in just a few months this has received nearly 3 million views, 2.9 million views. So the Space Marine is without a doubt an immensely popular figure, both in terms of how they look and what they represent. And in this episode of Retrohammer, I'm going to talk about how they look and the origins of that. And the origins of the Space Marine trace back to 1985, when Games Workshop released a limited edition model under the code LE2 called the Imperial Space Marine. And before us, we have an example of this very model. We can see that the Space Marine is wearing a fully enclosed suit of armour. He's clearly a futuristic warrior, as he carries a weapon unlike anything we know or would recognise today. But at the same time as his clearly futuristic nature, he still retains something of a savage brutality as well, for his futuristic rifle is fitted with a large, deadly looking bayonet. So this is a highly iconic miniature. I'll just zoom out. Let's pick up this chap and get a bit of a closer look at him. So the Imperial Space Marine came a bit before my time in terms of my engagement with the Warhammer 40,000 hobby, and indeed my real introduction came 1987-88 with the release of the main rulebook and the groundbreaking RTB01 Rogue Trader box set 01 Imperial Space Marines plastic box set. But miniatures had come before then, and the miniature we have before us, it was the first ever Space Marine sculpted and released by Games Workshop. If we just take him off his base and we look at the tab, we can indeed see in carefully written letters it does say Imperial Marine. I guess it would have been a little bit tricky to get Imperial Space Marine on there. This model was sculpted by Games Workshop veteran Bob Naismith. And if we take a look around this model, we can see it is a wonderfully detailed model. There's very fine detailing on the armour, a very complex gun, the heavy tubular cabling that became so iconic of the Space Marine, a holstered pistol, a knife. Again, this futuristic warrior still carries a knife, and again that says something about the hobby, the nature of the Space Marines. He wears a backpack, a power pack. He still is practical and carries a pouch. And on his shoulder he has an M symbol, presumably for Marine. But who knows, it may mean something else. So yes, this was the first ever Space Marine miniature. I never bought one at the time. I went straight onto the plastic models. I have vague recollections of a friend, of an older brother of a friend who had one of these, and I tried to persuade in vain at one point for him to swap it for some other models I had, but he wouldn't. I think that was probably because it was a limited run at the time, and not many were made. And it was only several years later, I think in the early 90s, that the model made a reappearance when it was sold as just a Marine with bolt gun number X or something. and sort of became almost an anonymous part of the then large collection of Space Marines. So clearly, this is a highly iconic design, and it was from this model that a year later a set of about 10 or 12 further Space Marine models in the same sort of style were released. And in the original Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader rulebook, much of the artwork featured these Marines, or Marines very much in this style, and particularly these very arcane but futuristic looking weapons, and some very distinctive artwork in this style. The actual armour is interesting in itself. It is a close-fitting armoured suit. It bears more than a passing resemblance to elements of medieval plate armour, particularly full plate armour. And the helmet has clear origins in style to the conical nosed helmets of the late 14th and early 15th century that were crafted to deflect arrows. And perhaps that was what Bob Naismith thought. He would use that design, and this helmet was designed to deflect bullets away from the Marine's head. The shape of the Marine helmet had some unintended humorous consequences for. I'm sure that this model was the beginning of what led to these Mark 6 Space Marines, because this is indeed what became known as Mark 6 armour. They acquired a couple of names. They became known as Beakies, for obvious reasons, but also probably this will if you're old enough and of part of the British audience, Space Wombles as well. Yes, and obviously again for the shape of the helmet. So yeah, it's fascinating to look at this model and think think even as early as it was how beautifully detailed it was and well sculpted, and also think how this was the start of something that became extremely iconic. When we look at the RTB01 plastic box set, it will see some interesting changes in style from this model. Many characteristics such as the shoulder pads, the heavy cabling, the pointed helmet, and the backpack and the heavy armour were retained, but the weapon, the bolt guns of the Marines became more familiar and characteristic to weapons of today, and well indeed back in the late 90s. And as well, the legs of the Space Marine were changed in design somewhat, and when I talk about and review the RTB01 set, I'll talk about what I believe to be the reasons for that change in style, because it's not perhaps what you might think. So yes, that's over 30 years ago that the Imperial Space Marine made his appearance, and recently Games Workshop was clearly aware, knocking the camera there, of the significance of this model, and earlier this year, those of us who were around picked up this flyer to advertise celebrating 35th anniversary of Space Marines, exclusive miniature, and I thought, ooh, interesting, April. So early one morning at Salute 2016, I swung by the Forge World stand and picked up this model here, the 30th anniversary Imperial Space Marine, and this is a fascinating re-imaging of our friend from 1985, and we have the classic, the iconic Rogue Trader artwork on the box here. The Imperial Space Marine model himself, painted, of course, in none other than Crimson Fist colours, and a gun that is pretty faithful to the original weapon. And there's the briefest of histories there to explain his origins, and here we indeed have him. The original Imperial Space Marine miniature not included. It says, in 1985, Games Workshop released the first ever Imperial Space Marine. This box contains a modern day representation of this classic miniature, and indeed it does. And it does come with some rules, so this isn't just a commemorative model. It is actually a practical gaming model, and Games Workshop decided to basically give a little boost to everybody who plays Space Marines. And the Marine comes armed with his disintegration combi gun and a disintegration pistol. He has a standard Marine profile, nothing special there, no special armour or anything. But his disintegration combi gun, I think, has a range of, the disintegrator part has a range of 18 inches, strength 5, AP 2 and instant death. So watch out, because the Imperial Space Marine may be the end of your hero. So yes, so while the Imperial Space Marine was the origin and the first Space Marine model that Games Workshop released, it was only to be 2 years later that the Space Marine became truly iconic and really took off and reached a mass market appeal that was otherwise not possible. And that's what I'll be talking about in my next review, when I review the Imperial Space Marines plastic box set RTB01 from 1987. This was Retrohammer. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.